The Night King was introduced as the ultimate force of destruction in Game of Thrones. He was ancient, patient, and almost impossible to stop. From the moment he first appeared beyond the wall, the series slowly built him into a threat greater than kings, armies, and political rivalries. Many people believed dragons would be the perfect answer to him because dragons had destroyed castles, burned entire armies, and helped forge the Seven Kingdoms. Yet the story repeatedly showed that dragons were never truly the Night King's biggest threat. They were powerful weapons, but the Night King understood their weaknesses and even turned their strength against the living. What really threatened him was knowledge, unity, memory, and the ability of humanity to put survival ahead of ambition. The Night King never feared raw destruction because destruction was already part of his nature. He commanded an army built entirely around overwhelming force. Every battle increased his power because every fallen soldier could rise again as part of his army. Dragons could burn thousands of wights at once, but the Night King could replenish his losses faster than most armies could recover. During the battle beyond the wall, Daenerys arrived with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion to rescue Jon Snow and his companions. The dragons devastated the army of the dead with massive streams of fire, yet the Night King remained calm. He did not panic or retreat. Instead, he waited for the perfect opportunity and destroyed Viserion with a single icy spear. That moment changed everything because it proved the Night King saw dragons as tools to exploit rather than unstoppable monsters. The resurrection of Viserion revealed another reason dragons were never his greatest threat. The Night King had the ability to corrupt powerful forces and use them for himself. Once Viserion became an undead dragon, the balance of power shifted dramatically. The wall, which had protected Westeros for thousands of years, was destroyed by dragonfire under the Night King's control. Dragons were supposed to defend the living, but one of them became the very weapon that allowed the dead to invade the realm. This transformation showed how adaptable the Night King truly was. He did not rely on brute strength alone. He understood timing, patience, and psychological fear. By taking a dragon away from Daenerys, he also weakened the confidence of the living armies. Another reason dragons were not his greatest threat is that the Night King always targeted the mind before the battlefield. He represented hopelessness more than physical destruction. Entire kingdoms collapsed because people refused to unite against him early enough. While rulers argued over crowns and alliances, the Night King advanced steadily south. Cersei ignored the danger because she believed political survival mattered more than the army of the dead. Many northern lords distrusted Daenerys because she was a foreign queen with dragons. These divisions benefited the Night King far more than any military advantage. He understood that human weakness came from fear, pride, and selfishness. Dragons could burn enemies, but they could not force humanity to trust each other. Bran Stark became a far greater threat to the Night King than any dragon because Bran represented memory and truth. As the three-eyed raven, Bran carried the history of the world and the knowledge of humanity's past mistakes. The Night King repeatedly targeted Bran because memory threatened the endless darkness he wanted to create. Dragons were physical creatures that could be injured or killed, but Bran's importance was symbolic and strategic. Through visions and ancient knowledge, Bran helped reveal the origins of the White Walkers and the dangers facing Westeros. The Night King knew that if humanity remembered its history and united around it, his ability to spread chaos would weaken. This explains why he personally came for Bran during the Battle of Winterfell, instead of focusing entirely on destroying the dragons first. Jon Snow also represented a deeper threat than dragons ever did. Unlike many rulers in Westeros, Jon understood the seriousness of the coming war before most people accepted it. He traveled beyond the wall, formed alliances with former enemies, and constantly warned others about the army of the dead. The Night King recognized that leadership and unity could become more dangerous than firepower. Jon inspired wildlings, northerners, and eventually Daenerys herself to fight together. Dragons gave the living a military advantage, but Jon's ability to unite divided people created something the Night King could not easily destroy. The dead relied on obedience and fear, while the living still possessed choice, loyalty, and sacrifice. The Battle of Winterfell perfectly demonstrated why dragons were limited against the Night King. Daenerys and Jon attacked from the sky with Drogon and Rhaegal, but poor visibility, blizzards, and chaos reduced their effectiveness. The Night King manipulated the weather itself, covering the battlefield in darkness and snow. Even powerful dragons struggled to locate targets or coordinate attacks. At one point, Drogon became overwhelmed by swarming whites, forcing Daenerys into a desperate escape. This showed that dragons were vulnerable when separated from strategy and support. The Night King adapted to every direct assault against him. He relied on endurance and pressure instead of dramatic victories. The real turning point came not from Dragonfire but from Arya Stark. Arya succeeded because she combined stealth, speed, and surprise. Throughout the series, she trained with the Faceless Men and learned skills built around precision rather than overwhelming strength. When Arya killed the Night King with Valyrian steel, the entire army of the dead collapsed instantly. This moment carried an important message about the nature of the conflict. The Night King was not defeated by the largest creature or the strongest attack. He was defeated by human adaptability, courage, and the willingness to act at exactly the right moment. Arya succeeded where dragons failed because she exploited the Night King's overconfidence. Valyrian steel and dragonglass were also more significant threats than dragons themselves. These weapons directly harmed White Walkers and their leader. Samwell Tarly discovered that dragonglass could kill White Walkers during an encounter beyond the wall. Later, Jon Snow proved Valyrian steel could do the same. The Night King understood that these ancient weapons posed a genuine danger because they could permanently destroy his forces instead of temporarily slowing them down. Dragons produced fire, but dragonglass and Valyrian steel attacked the very magic sustaining the dead. The living needed knowledge and preparation to use these weapons effectively, which again highlights why intelligence mattered more than raw destructive power. In the end, the Night King was never defined simply by physical strength. He symbolized death, winter, and the collapse of civilization itself. Dragons were terrifying creatures, but they represented only one form of power. The Night King's greatest enemies were the people who refused to surrender their humanity despite impossible odds. Bran preserved memory. Jon created unity. Arya delivered the final strike. Even characters like Samwell, Davos, and Theon played important roles by protecting knowledge, defending Winterfell, and buying time. The story ultimately showed that survival depended on cooperation and sacrifice rather than overwhelming force alone. Dragons changed battles, but human choices changed history. One overlooked detail about the Night King is how carefully he studied the emotions of the living. He constantly used fear as a weapon stronger than claws or ice. Hardhome was not only a massacre. It was a warning designed to terrify survivors and convince them resistance was meaningless. The Night King raised the dead in front of Jon Snow because he wanted the living to understand the scale of his power. Dragons could inspire awe, but the Night King inspired despair, and despair spreads faster through kingdoms than fire ever could. Entire castles abandoned hope before battles even began. This psychological pressure explains why the Night King moved slowly and deliberately instead of rushing south immediately. He wanted humanity divided, exhausted, and frightened long before the final confrontation at Winterfell. Even Daenerys, who had spent years believing her dragons made her nearly unstoppable, realized they could not solve every problem once she faced the army of the dead. Her losses beyond the wall and during the long night proved that courage and leadership mattered more than spectacle. The Night King understood something many rulers ignored throughout the series. Armies win wars for a time, but belief decides whether civilizations survive. That is why dragons alone could never defeat him, and why the people willing to stand together became his greatest nightmare. The ending of the conflict reinforced that idea clearly. After the Night King died, the surviving characters were not celebrated because they possessed the greatest weapons. They were remembered because they endured terror, loss, and impossible choices without abandoning each other completely. In many ways, that human resilience was the one force the Night King could never control or understand. This is the end of today's video about the Night King. If you found it interesting, hit the like button, leave a comment, share and subscribe for more content like this.